This is one of the harshest truths about modern history. For America, war has never been solely about defense, liberty, or justice. It has always been about profit. Every conflict became more than battles fought on fields. It became a stage for financial gain. While ordinary families endured shortages and sent their sons to fight, the engines of commerce quietly turned destruction into opportunity. America did not merely wage wars. It mastered the art of monetizing them, transforming suffering into a financial blueprint that reshaped the global economy we inhabit today. To grasp this fully, we must look back to the First World War, the Great War that erupted in 1914. Initially, the United States remained on the sidelines, while Europe drained itself, Britain, France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, all consuming vast resources and lives at a staggering rate. Soldiers marched by the millions, artillery roared endlessly, and national treasuries struggled to keep pace. Amid this chaos, American banks and industries saw a moment of immense opportunity, quietly converting the horror of war into a system of unprecedented profit and influence. And that is when the United States first recognized the potential of war as more than a fight on the battlefield. From across the Atlantic, American financiers and manufacturers positioned themselves as indispensable engines of support. Leading Wall Street firms struck landmark agreements with the British and French governments, arranging massive loans and acting as purchasing intermediaries for vital supplies. Steel, wheat, coal, and munitions flowed from American ports, all backed by the promise of repayment with interest. To contextualize, the sums involved dwarfed the federal budget of the era. Each bullet fired, each shell that landed on the Western Front, was also a promise of future financial return. By the time the United States formally entered the war in 1917, its economic entanglement with the Allies was already profound. If Britain or France failed, American banks would face enormous losses. The boundary between national interest and financial gain had become indistinct. Citizens were urged to purchase Liberty bonds, portrayed as acts of patriotic duty. Posters commanded "Your country needs you." Public figures toured cities promoting investment, while children collected coins for thrift stamps, convertible into bonds. For the first time, an entire population became a financial front line. Yet, while ordinary savers contributed modestly, the real profits flowed to financiers and industrial factories thrived, and Wall Street's influence expanded dramatically. A precedent was set. War could be funded not only through taxation or gold reserves, but through public debt underwritten by private capital, a system that persists to this day. Fast forward to the Second World War, and the framework was refined on an unprecedented scale. Europe descended into chaos once more, and American industry mobilized to meet the demand. President Roosevelt coined the term "arsenal of democracy," and by the time America entered the war in December 1941, factories were already operating at peak capacity. Ships, planes, tanks, and munitions were produced in numbers never before imagined. Behind the scenes, the financial machinery was just as active. The Treasury issued war bonds, supported by the Federal Reserve, turning millions of Americans into lenders of last resort. Over 85 million citizens participated, generating over $185 billion, more than half the total cost of the conflict. Meanwhile, corporations shifted to war production. Boeing, Ford, and General Motors suspended civilian output to supply the military, often receiving guaranteed profits regardless of efficiency. Shareholders collected dividends, while the connection between capital and national power tightened. War became more than an ordeal to endure. It was an engine of economic growth. While combat raged overseas, another transformation unfolded domestically: the dollar's evolution beyond gold. The United States suspended gold convertibility to protect reserves, and by 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement formalized the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The U.S. emerged not only as a victor on the battlefield, but as the cornerstone of global finance. Every bond, loan, and retooled factory laid the foundation for financial supremacy, demonstrating that the machinery of war could double as the machinery of economic power. After 1945, the Cold War emerged as a hybrid of political struggle and economic warfare. Defense budgets ballooned, funding entire industries in aerospace, electronics, and energy. Economists labeled this approach military Keynesianism government spending, on war keeping the economy stable, what began as an emergency tactic became a permanent framework. Incentives for conflict multiplied as defense contractors, banks, and politicians benefited, while ordinary citizens absorbed the costs through inflation and taxation. By the Vietnam era, this system was fully entrenched. Military engagements became economic levers, with the war's financial infrastructure ensuring profit regardless of political outcomes. Vietnam alone cost the United States over $100 billion, a staggering sum for the period. Despite human losses and ultimate withdrawal, the financial system continued to operate efficiently. Helicopters, weapons, and aircraft were produced and delivered at fixed prices, with banks financing deficits through bond sales. Americans bore the cost in higher taxes and rising prices. Inflation during the 1960s and 1970s reflected the distortion of the domestic economy by military expenditure. President Johnson essay promise of guns and butter, war abroad and social programs at home exposed the limitations of deficit spending, culminating in the decoupling of the dollar from gold in 1971. The fiat currency system emerged, backed by trust in the U.S. government and its industrial and military capacity rather than by tangible assets. Vietnam reshaped not only geopolitics, but the very foundation of money itself. The oil shocks of the 1970s further intertwined global finance with military strategy. The establishment of the petrodollar, requiring oil sales to be conducted exclusively in U.S. currency, cemented America's monetary dominance. Strategic military positioning in the Middle East ensured the durability of this system. Money and war were no longer separate forces. They became inseparable components of global strategy. The 1991 Gulf War reinforced this model. Iraq's invasion of Kuwait threatened international oil markets, prompting a rapid U.S.-led response. The conflict was brief militarily, yet corporate and financial gains were immense. Defense, firms, and oil-linked companies profited handsomely, their stock values surging as technological innovations were displayed in real time to a global audience. Wars became both a proving ground for innovation and a platform for marketing, enhancing corporate influence and financial returns. September 11, 2001, and the subsequent War on Terror marked the pinnacle of this evil. Conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq cost approximately $6 trillion when accounting for veteran care and interest on debt. Such expenditures could have funded transformative social initiatives, yet instead fueled a cycle enriching defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Halliburton, and Raytheon. Bonds were issued, interest rates kept low, and taxpayers carried the burden through deficits. War was no longer judged by victory or loss. Success was measured in contracts fulfilled and financial interests served. The continuation of this financial war strategy is evident in modern America. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned of has become inseparable from the nation's economic framework. Defense spending consistently exceeds $800 billion annually, supporting entire industries, cities, and regions. Wall Street benefits through financing mechanisms, while politicians leverage spending to secure political support. The cycle is self-reinforcing, ensuring constant demand for military expenditure regardless of actual threats abroad. The impact on everyday Americans is subtle but profound. Inflation, rising taxes, and the erosion of purchasing power tie citizens' finances to a system that thrives on perpetual conflict. Wars are no longer fought solely on distant battlefields. They are waged through public debt, monetary policy, and financial manipulation. Observing the global crises of recent decades highlights this pattern. The 2008 financial collapse was not a military conflict, yet government bailouts protected corporations while citizens bore the consequences. Similarly, pandemic stimulus packages disproportionately flowed into financial markets, demonstrating how peacetime crises now follow wartime financial playbooks. Deficit spending, bond issuance, and corporate guarantees, perfected in the context of war, now operate continuously. The machinery of war has merged with the machinery of finance. Understanding this reality reveals that crises are rarely accidental. Conflict, instability, and volatility are structural features designed to generate opportunity for those who comprehend the levers of debt, currency, and resource control. The average citizen, lacking such insight, experiences diminished savings, rising prices, and increased debt. The financial system depends on dependence, creating control through necessity. This pattern repeats across generations, from the world wars to modern interventions in the Middle East. Wars are leveraged for power, influence, and capital accumulation, with ideology often serving as a veneer for financial gain. The lesson extends beyond simplistic judgments of morality or corruption. Money and power are inseparable, and every major conflict in the past century demonstrates this principle. By examining history through a financial lens, one can identify the incentives that drive policy decisions and understand why some conflicts persist despite apparent failure. Observing defense budgets, corporate profits, and public debt reveals the underlying economic engine behind ostensibly political or ideological actions. Financial literacy, in this context, requires comprehension not only of personal finance, but of the global mechanisms that shape opportunity and risk. Modern wars, including the War on Terror, illustrate this convergence vividly. Contracts for weapons, logistics, and support services follow a predictable pattern of guaranteed profitability. Banks finance deficits through public borrowing, while taxpayers indirectly fund ongoing operations. Corporate shareholders profit regardless of battlefield outcomes, reinforcing a system where financial incentives favor prolonged engagement. The human and social costs remain largely externalized. War becomes a tool for capital accumulation as much as a political strategy, and the line between national security and profit blurs further with each conflict. Even in peacetime, the economic structures established by wartime finance persist. Defense contractors expand into civilian markets, leveraging expertise gained in military production. Financial institutions adapt models perfected in war bonds, guarantees, and public debt to broader economic applications. Crises, whether economic, environmental, or geopolitical, become opportunities to extract value for those positioned at the top of the system. Citizens often bear the brunt of these strategies, experiencing inflation, taxation, and limited economic mobility. Understanding this pattern is crucial for anyone seeking to navigate the modern financial landscape. The overarching pattern is clear: wars and conflicts, regardless of ideological justification, create predictable economic outcomes. Profit, influence, and power accrue to a select few, while the broader population shoulders the risks. Historical examples from World Wars I and II to Vietnam, the Gulf War, and post-9/11 interventions illustrate a consistent model. Financial incentives align with continued engagement, ensuring that the machinery of war and finance operates seamlessly. Bonds, loans, contracts, and public debt form a cycle where financial success is decoupled from military or political victory. Each crisis reinforces the structure, demonstrating the durability of the system. In the current context, citizens are participants in this system whether they recognize it or not. Everyday financial decisions, from spending to investing, interact with policies and markets influenced by defense spending and military priorities. Understanding this dynamic allows for a critical perspective on national and global events. Observing government actions, corporate profits, and financial mechanisms provides insight into who benefits from conflict and how public resources are allocated. Knowledge of these patterns is a form of financial empowerment, enabling informed choices and strategic foresight. In essence, modern history reveals that war has always been as much an economic instrument as a political one. Recognizing this duality is critical for understanding the interplay of money, power, and policy. Financial literacy extends beyond budgets and investments. It encompasses the ability to identify systemic incentives and comprehend the historical continuity of profit-driven conflict. Observing history with this lens reveals the hidden architecture of wealth accumulation and influence, providing clarity on why nations act as they do and why citizens experience economic pressures in ways often disconnected from overt political narratives. Next time, war is justified as a matter of honor, liberty, or democracy. Remember, the underlying mechanisms involve interest payments, contracts, and corporate profits. While political outcomes may fluctuate, the economic machinery endures, perpetuating cycles of influence and dependence. Understanding these patterns equips one to see beyond propaganda and rhetoric. recognizing how wars and crises shape both national policy and individual financial realities. True insight emerges not merely from learning to manage money, but from comprehending the system itself, how it functions, worum et cerbis, and why history consistently mirrors these financial imperatives. If you want genuine financial insight, if you want true control over your wealth, you must look beyond slogans and propaganda and understand the hidden machinery of money, power, and influence. Because if you remain unaware, it will shape your life regardless. If this opened your eyes, hit subscribe. History holds the answers, and here we'll guide you to see them.